Hi everyone, welcome to Third Coast Gaming. We're just talking about Neon Genesis. Neon Genesis Evangelion Rebuild 4 came out. Last week we kind of watched some episodes. So now we're going to kind of get into that. But first, I'm opening this beer up because we're getting started, Austin.
Yep. That's the real key to Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah, it's me. I've always wanted to crack open a beer in front of a microphone. So I
Yeah,
did it.
nice.
So yeah,
Yeah.
we kind of wanted to talk about as this being a part two
Because
to our last discussion, is Rebuild 2 kind of sets off to change the ending and starting to change what that second half of what I say the timeline of the
Yep.
first series is, or just kind of rewrite the
Yeah,
ending as well.
of what Neon Genesis was. Like the first movie is just like a retelling of like the early episodes about or the first rebuild is a retelling of the early episodes of Neon Genesis that are about Shinji and Rei. And then once you get into the second rebuild, it becomes about Shinji, Rei introduces Asuka, and for the most of that movie is their sort of their relationship with each other, their working relationship and the kind of really one-sided love triangle that forms, right? Because Rey is like her personality is built in such a way. The other thing that these movies tell you pretty much right off the bat is that Rey's a clone of who you don't quite know yet. Rey is air quote programmed to have affection for Shinji, and Asuka is as a person really does like Shinji, is annoyed with how emotional he can be,
Yeah, and it's
but
at some
still
points
it
he
does have,
doesn't
yeah.
pay attention to Asuka's the cooking stuff. He ends up wanting to cook more for Rei than Asuka, and then Asuka's trying to learn to cook,
Well,
and then the stuff goes off from there. Then the bad stuff happens after that.
that's not like he doesn't cook for Asuka, instead he cooks for Rey. Like he forgets to cook like for Asuka. Like he does not like cook for Rey and then like she takes notice, right? Like he begins cooking for everyone at that point. Like once Asuka tells him, right? Like Asuka like kind of like bosses him into doing that, and then he starts cooking for Masato, himself, Rei, and Asuka. And this is like when that part of that sort of crush becomes evident, is because I think the first time he brings Rei food, he notices that her hand has been cut up and she has several bandages and cuts on her left hand, and Asuka takes note of that. And the next scene, you see Asuka with band-aids wrapped around like her right ring finger and her right thumb.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the fun stuff I enjoyed of that. And then Rei was trying to set up some dinner plans to get him and Shinji and his dad to talk, and then Unit 3 shows
Yeah,
they bring Unit 3 to Japan. They put Asuka in it, and then she gets infected by the angel, and we kind of later find out that Asuka still has angel
like
in her blood.
fused.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes this sort of like almost, I don't want to say like ascended, but it's kind of that thing like where she is becomes this fusion of like human and angel, in this sequence that they changed like from Neon Genesis, because it didn't used to be Asuka. Um, it was one of Shinji's
Yeah,
friends,
Toji.
and yeah, Toji, and like right before this sequence, they have this really they have this really neat like one-on-one between Asuka and Misato, because Asuka's talking to Masato and is trying to get help on being a more emotionally like open person, and Masato's giving her that advice. And it's this really neat one-on-one discussion that is pretty sort of is held back by the fact that during this scene, Asuka is putting on a just disgusting plug suit, like a new design for the plug suit that is like semi-transparent and is showing off a lot
Yeah.
of her body
Yeah.
in a way. Like we've spoken about how like the early parts of this, like how the introduction between Shinji and Rei, they use the awkwardness of attraction and nudity, and they attempt to say something with that. But really, once you get to the second part of like 2.22, it it's just them being horny in a way that's not good. Like I don't think there's only
No,
one other
because these are
instance
teenagers, and
of,
I was like, that's
yeah.
weird. But also, Japan is weird with that. And I'm not getting into that stuff, but And the thing about, like, to go back to it, like, when I didn't realize it, I forgot that when Shinji falls on Rei and, like, Rebuild 1 in that earlier episode, like, the underwear drawer comes, like, flying out and, like,
Yeah.
gets on and it's like, yep, that stuff's weird. But, yeah, that plug suit's weird. But, so I think in that one I think Asuka gets hospitalized. He doesn't end up killing her, but that scene, like, he rips. Like, they put the dummy plug up, and it rips the fucking shit apart of Unit 3 because Shinji doesn't want to fight it because he's like, I know there's a person in there. Originally, it's like, he knows there's a pilot. He didn't know it was Toji after, but I think he knew it was Asuka this time because she was like, yes, I'll test pilot this so you can go and have dinner with your dad.
Yeah. She told him as much. So yeah, he already knew. And because of the fact that Shinji has an emotional attachment to the pilot, they installed a dummy plug, which essentially takes control of the Evangelion away from Shinji. With the intent of the dummy plug being that Gendo can have like full control over Evangelion.
Yeah, and then which after like the dummy plug stops working in Unit 1. And then after that, another angel shows up, and Rei is the first one to fight it, and it merges with Rei and makes this weird angel Ava hybrid with the leg, like the body of a woman, kind of thinking it's...
Rei is the second person to show up.
Rei. Oh, who's the first person
because
to show up?
The first person to show up is Mary. This is the new character.
Yeah.
The character who is, who comes in at the start of the second movie is piloting a Ava, I believe, named Unit 5, which is an Evangelion, but like on a tripod, basically. It's cool and interesting, but it gets destroyed.
It's not complete, and so it's using the tunnels as a way to move around, and it also gets energy from that, which is why it's not plugged in, because it's creating it. And they fight like... I think that's actually the third angel, because they do it. It's previous. That's why they added numbers to the other angels. And then she comes back.
Yeah, she lands like she parachutes onto the roof of Shinji's school, interacts with Shinji, lands on him. Yeah. It's very much her breast in his face.
And then she makes a joke about her breasts as well, which that happened.
Yeah,
that's
just horny.
She does it later too. It's not a thing that stops.
Anno is just horny for the rest of these movies.
Yeah, it's not as bad in 4, I'll say. At least until like there's some jokes and there's some characters who are less clothed, but I think the rest of the movie in 4 like makes up for that, which we'll get to. Which that's my opinion on it. We'll get to it when we start talking about it. But Rei and an angel get merged together. And then Shinji comes out and he creates near third impact by trying to save Rei from the angel. Yeah. And then as we find out it's out in 4, because the whole time in 3 is like, because that happens, it looks like it's third impact. There's a bunch of shit going on at the end of 2. And then you get this time lapse. It's 15 years later. Shinji, you get this fight scene with Mari and Asuka in space, and they're like trying to collect a box, which you later find out is Unit 1 in the box with Shinji in it.
Yeah.
And then that rolls into 3. There's a bunch of shit that happens in 3, and there's like... 3 is really cool because it's like this... Everything feels like it happens in like 3 days in 3 because it's so fast-paced. It's 15 years later. Near impact, third impact fucked a bunch of shit up. The world has changed. It's way different from the original anime. Asuka has a flying like almost what's the manga that it like the ship combat kind of was popularized in?
One Piece? I don't know.
It's a space anime where it's Battleship Yamato is I think what it's called.
Which is a big inspiration for Anno. Like it's Spaceship Yamato he loves that shit.
Yeah, which comes up as like I can see why they would want to have some fun with some like spaceship combat in the third and fourth movie. Yeah. 3 is like 90 minutes and it's like this. To me, it's like action, and then it has the story stuff, and then it has a bunch of action, and it brings Kaoru back, and it has like, Shinji's like, I almost had third impact. Why? Where'd Rei go? And you find out like she's in Unit 1. Her soul's in there because he saved her when he's like trying to pull her out, and he's getting farther and farther in his entry plug. and then Kaoru comes back from the moon and like basically stops Unit 1 from actually creating Third Impact.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's sorted in a way where if like this first movie is about Shinji and Rei, the second movie is adding Asuka into that mix. This third movie is then mostly about Shinji and Kaoru's friendship and relationship and the complexities of that revolve around Kaoru mostly just wanting to like make Shinji happy, being his one and only character trait.
Yeah, as like because the movie starts out and you are with the what did they call the ship that they are
It is
on?
the name of the ship is the Wonder,
Yeah, the
and it
Wonder.
is being manned by Will, which is an anti-nerve militant group led by Misato and rebellious staff who used to work at Nerve. So that includes Misato, Ritsuku, and the three staff who they interacted with a lot at Nerve on the like control panels, and some other people who were in Tokyo 3 and around that area when Near
Yeah,
Third
and like
Impact
Toji's
happened.
sister is there too because she's old. That's how
Yeah,
they
as a medical
introduced the
officer.
time jump. Is that this is Toji's sister? I thought she was really young, and she's like, oh, it's been a while. And I really love. I remember first seeing this when it came out, 6 years ago ish, sometime like that. I like the
About
dynamic that
7.
they had originally in this. They were working together. It was like all these people and Masato working in Nerve, working with Shinji's dad, and then they flip it to they're against each other because they realize, oh, Shinji's dad is the bad guy. He's trying to human instrumentality and all this shit because he was the one trying to make Third Impact happen,
Yeah.
and so they're against him, the anti-Ava stuff, and like, what was it? The core of the ship is Unit 1.
Yep.
Yeah, and you still have like Asuka and Mari have not aged because apparently if you are a Evangelion pilot, you don't age, which this is
Like
kind of the first time that showed up.
being immersed in the LCL liquid that they have to flood the uh, control plug with every time has done something to their body so they do not age. So Asuka is still like 14 as is Mary, as is Shinji. The only real change, like Asuka now has an eye patch.
Yeah, and a cool hat at one point as well. Gotta like her hat. So I will say, like,
Yeah.
you have those characters on the Wily or the Wonder, and then Unit Zero shows up, breaks into the side of the ship, and grabs Shinji, and you go back to Gendo, and then you meet, like, I think they call her. It's like Rei Q, Kaoru, Gendo, and then Gendo's like assistant or like first guy under
Yeah.
him.
His buddy. I don't want to say buddy. Like, I believe it's Fukuyama.
It was
I
like
think
it
is
was like
that
his old
character's name.
teacher that the mom
Yeah.
also knew. That's
It
why he's
was.
sticking around.
Yeah. It was his wife's teacher, and like in Neon Genesis, the only reason he is around Gendo is because Seal does not trust Gendo, and they want him to keep an eye on Gendo, and he doesn't like Gendo either. That's the thing. The rebuilds change his character. I mean, really get rid of most of his character, and he just becomes Gendo's second in command.
Yeah, and then so this movie, the way it differentiates is I think they're trying to open up the gate of Gulf or Guff with
Yeah, they're trying
the
to open. Yeah,
yeah. So they
the
have
doors
like
of
Unit
Guff.
13, and it's like a co-piloted thing, and so Shinji and Kaoru both have to pilot it, and they go down and they get stopped at one point because Kaoru takes the neck piece that's like an exploding device they put on Shinji originally just in case he ever got into Ava
Yeah,
again. So he wore it. So
yeah.
Shinji
So
like watches
yeah,
Kaoru die, and by the end of the movie and into 4, Shinji is in like a state of like not talking to people, and he's fucked up because he basically was trying to be the hero in 2 more than like in the series was that rebuild 2, and he gets instantly punished for that by saving Rei, and
yeah.
he's
Well,
like
and
questioning everything in this, and then he kind of doesn't care because Masato won't tell him shit in 3. They don't care because they're like, yeah, you
yeah,
fucking did this in 2, and he's like, I have no fucking idea how this happened.
Yeah. Well, the thing is like in two, they were all there. Like Masato was there, seeing Shinji, like seeing like Ava 1 mutate, because like the thing that happens like and there's like it loses its arm in this fight with this angel, and then it regrows it, and it's this kind of like spectral thing, and that's the arm that Unit 1 uses to plunge into the core of this angel to get Rei. And Masato's there watching, is yelling at Shinji to do this because like, and it's a great moment within like the context of 2, because it's the first time that Shinji as a character is like actualizing his own desires and what he wants, and what he wants is to save Rei. And but he's set up to fail. Like
Yeah.
Gendo sets him up to fail, and that's how like third impact almost happens, and Kaoru has to come in.
And it's like you say
And
everything
by
up before they close the gate and stop it from activating is according to Gendo's plans.
Yeah, yeah, because Kaoru tells Shinji because they need to go into the chamber where Lilith used to be stored, and they need to get the 2 spears that are keeping Lilith from third impact from finally happening. And what Kaoru tells Shinji is that by getting those spears, he will be able to rewrite the world and set it all right again. Like make sure that the near third impact doesn't happen, because he just showed Shinji the result of near third impact. And that result is that most of the world is just like a blood red. The oceans are contaminated to the point where nothing can live in them, and most society has been completely destroyed. So Shinji really wants to go do this thing with the spears and save the world, even to the point where near the end of it, as he gets into a fight with Asuka and Mary, and Kaoru begins telling Shinji, "Wait, we can't do this. Something's wrong here. This isn't what I thought it was." Shinji's still going forward to get the spears,
Yeah,
and
and
then he
then
gets
Kaoru's
them.
like sitting there in the other seat being like, something's wrong, these spears don't look the
Yeah,
same, and he's like thinking and thinking, and Shinji just keeps going because he wants to
yeah.
make everything go back to normal and stuff.
And Kaoru gets locked out. He gets locked out of Ava controls. The dummy plug takes over.
Yeah, which is like,
So that
it's all
way,
according to Gendo's plan. And I love the ending of this movie, that it's like 13 is fucked up, and it lands somewhere, and they are back in what I believe is Neo Tokyo, and it's Rei, Q, Asuka, and Shinji walking in like what in my mind is like a desert, and they're going somewhere, and I'm like, I don't even know where this is gonna go from here. I was like, fuck, dope ending.
yeah, it's like Shinji's all but comatose, and Rei's just angry. I mean, not Rei. Asuka's just angry, and Rei's following along because she doesn't quite know what she wants to do. Because like throughout all of 3, she has this like identity crisis because she's like, "Oh, I'm Rei," or "I think I'm Rei," and Shinji just begins saying like, "No, she's not Rei.
Yeah,
Rei's a person, and this is not a person. This is like some like a doll,
and it's
basically."
wild
So
that
she
they. Sorry, go for it.
so she begins. So that's why she like leaves that third movie following Asuka and Shinji.
And it's wild. I don't remember if it was 3 or 4, but it's like, oh yeah, the Shikinami project, where it's like this Asuka is a clone too of the original
That's
Asuka.
4.
That's 4,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's 3 or 3 plus 1.
yeah. Which for all
Yeah,
intents and purposes, I'm gonna call it 4.
yeah. We'll just call it 4, just so
um,
it's easy to
I
follow.
don't remember what the original title of it was. It doesn't matter. But
What, Evangelion Rebuild 3 plus 1 Thrice Upon a Time?
no, the title before that, they had like working titles and stuff. Like 3 was originally Rebuild Q or something. I like the
Incredible.
name Thrice Upon a Time. It's a reference to the book about.
Yeah,
Isn't it about the author and Jack the Ripper going to modern day or something?
I don't know.
I'll have to look it up real fast. But yeah, I remember it was like, oh man, I can't wait for 4.0 to come out. These have all mostly been 2 years apart, and then
And then
all this shit has
nothing.
kind of happened where it's like Ano had this like deep depression after 3, and then he did Shin Godzilla, and kind of COVID happened right at the end of it. And there's really that
Yeah,
good documentary that kind of talks about like a bunch of stuff in making a 4.
yeah. It talks about like the struggle of making 4. I think something that documentary focuses on is the struggle of getting that opening section of 4 right. And like you can tell they spent the most time on that section because it's the best part of that movie.
Yeah, I agree. I
Um,
love all of that stuff in the beginning. It was so good to see something like that coming from like Evangelion, all the like the family themes and like
Yeah.
mother and like working and like just like so they're walking through the desert in the beginning of 4, and they get to a town, and it's a town that is off to the side of like Neo Tokyo, right? Or Tokyo 3.
Yeah,
I think you said that last
yeah,
week
it's
too.
around I said Neo
Yeah.
Tokyo. I don't even know Neo Tokyo is from something else
I think it's
entirely.
Gundam. Um
Yeah,
so
Tokyo 3, yes. And
and
Kinsuke,
yeah.
who is one of Shinji's classmates, finds them walking around and takes them back to what we're just going to call the village.
Yeah, and Kensuke is like the survivalist guy who likes camping and military stuff, and he's really thriving like in this new
Yeah,
world. And you get to meet Toji, and he becomes a doctor, and he has a family, and all that. I was like, I love all this shit. And apparently, when Asuka's not on duty, she lives with Kensuke, so that's where she comes to when she's not on the Wunder. And that's
yeah,
like a village that has these like points created that are not that are they are working on the land growing stuff because it is not being affected by like the aftermath of near third impact and
yeah.
like the land being
Because they have
destroyed.
this like giant pod or like giant pillar that is like emitting a force field that's keeping the corruption of that near third impact away. We see them activate one of those in Paris at the beginning of this movie in like a 7-minute action sequence.
And I think there might have been one
Um,
in 3 as well when I was watching that. I was like, oh, there it is. Can't
there
remember.
might have been. But yeah, so this village is just, like Shinji's like the whole point of this village is like working Shinji out of this depressive episode, right? Like you meet Toji, who is air quote a doctor, right? Not really trained in the way that like modern doctors are. He's just someone he had this. They needed someone to be a doctor, and he could do it. So that's why how he's been filling that role. And it's a really like it's a bit in the roles that people have in this village. I will say it's like it's a bit gendered in an uncomfortable way. Like one of the first things that Ray does is interact with Toji's wife, who they still only call class rep, right? Because it's like the class rep of their school they
It's,
went to.
it's
Um,
like the joke from the
and
anime because that's the only thing they ever refer to
yeah,
her. It's fucking the ongoing joke of that.
yeah, and like the thing is, like Ray's interaction with her mostly revolve around being a mother and taking care of a child. And like one of the early interactions is Ray watching her breastfeed the baby, and then Ray like looking at her own breast as the class rep has to look at her and say like, "No, you're too young to do it, sweetie."
Yeah.
And like Ray's disappointment at that, like it's like those kind of interactions are weird and like a bit gendered, but then you have Ray farming, right? Because everyone is doing something. Shinji is just being sad and depressed. Asuka's being angry, and Ray is trying to realize like who she is in this world. So she starts working, uh, at a farm with people as they start planting like seeds to grow crops and food. It's a really nice segment for Ray specifically.
Which is like Ray 2, not the other Ray, which is like
Yeah.
her coming to her own as her own character and like learning how to be human in a way because she's almost an infant if you think about
Yeah.
her. Like she has this childlike wonder of the world as she's like learning about farming and
Yeah,
like
she,
falling
she
in the
just hasn't been told
mud.
anything and doesn't know how to like feel because like again, she's only there to pilot an Evangelion to get Shinji back. Yeah, and like throughout this whole like she is pushing like the other characters, like any development that Asuka and Shinji have is mostly because of like Rei, right? Like she is the first time Shinji speaks to anyone while he's in this because he's laying about in Kinsuke's like house for most of it, and then he leaves after Asuka gets really upset with him for just laying around on the floor and force feeds food down his throat. He
Yeah.
leaves, he goes to a ruin, and he's real quiet. He's by himself for like a good section of like this part of the movie, and then Ray comes in, and after a while, he starts talking to her. And he starts like sort of working through it, and he finally has like that break where he just can't hold anything in anymore, and he just starts crying.
Just a good cry right there.
Yeah, like it's probably like again, this is like the best of Evangelion in a very real way.
Yeah, and I'm guessing there's
Also,
almost that parallel with Anna, where he got over. I'm sure at some point there are points where you grow up and like you have to get over your depression, like move forward and try to like not think about, like Shinji talks about like he shouldn't think about other people's stuff when trying to do his, and that bad things will happen. It's not in your control. Is some of the stuff I'm trying to remember that were the messages of like Shinji coming out of that.
Well, it's mostly like, like the world's fucked up, right? Like it got really destroyed, but like we can still build something. Like so much of this solid 40 minutes of this movie is everyone telling Shinji about their lives. Like it's Toji talking about his post-apocalypse life, and how he had to do a lot of bad stuff to live, and them kind of like working to make amends for like what it costs to survive in this world. And this kind of thought of like, we don't know if this world is going to last, but while it's here and while we can live in it, we're going to try to make it as good as we can, because that's all you can do. That's all any of us can do. And that's why Toji's the doctor. That's why Kensuke is like a repairman and technician who's going around and making sure that like the pillar keeping the ruin at bay is working. It's why he's making sure
like your
that there is
local
water
repairman
flowing.
in a way is how I thought of him.
Everyone, like the work people are doing in this village are not like, it's not work in the way that we think of work. It is work born out of pure necessity, and they all have to be pitching into it, because all of the, like, even the farm workers, all the farm workers who work with Ray are elderly, are like middle-aged.
Yeah, and they're all extremely happy, like showing Ray around. Like at some point, they're doing the thing where they go to the hot springs and they're like relaxing after a long day's work. And I was like, oh, all this stuff is really fun. I think that stuff really touched me, and it was cool. I'm trying to remember, how did Shinji exactly get out of his like being stuck in his depression? Was it his conversation? Because he has that conversation with Ray, and then she's talking to, and at some point her head blows off. I don't remember if it's the same scene or if she goes back.
It is that, right? It is this slow sort of progress with Shinji. Shinji and Asuka. Asuka, who, like, this is the other thing about like how weirdly pervy this movie is. Asuka, who spends like the entire time they're in this village only wearing like her underwear and a bomber jacket that belongs to Kensuke. Like Ray kind of, like Asuka and Ray have this conversation where Asuka confronts Ray with the fact that she's programmed to feel affection for Shinji, and Ray just immediately claps back with, "Yeah, I know. Like I know I'm supposed to feel affection towards towards the third boy is what they call him in that conversation, but I'm fine with that." And over the course of about a week spent in this village, Ray sort of begins talking with Shinji and helping him sort of process everything and get through it. Shinji goes and speaks with a boy named Ryoji Kaji, who is the son of Masato and Kaji, who we learn has died during near third impact. And it's like through this very long process, Shinji eventually becomes ready to get back to being around people, and he's sort of talking with Ray about this, and then and then Ray gets fridged, right? Ray is killed to motivate Shinji because she has been away from LCL for a week, and she needs to be like sort of submerged in LCL to keep her physical form. And as she sort of confronts the fact that she's about to die, she goes to talk to Shinji. They have a very nice conversation. They have a very good conversation, and then she explodes.
Yeah, and he gets like blood right in his face. I was like, that.
Yeah.
I was like, is this gonna make Shinji like go in his depression again? He kind of does and doesn't in a way.
Well, he becomes very stoic, right? Like he sort of has to put up a layer of stoicism. He's right after that, he just walks to where the Wonder is docking. He goes up to Kensuke and Asuka, and he tells Asuka, "Okay, I'm going with you. I'm not staying here." And then Asuka sighs and tases him.
Yeah, and the head blowing up was such a jarring moment, because I was like, that's not the like reaction I expected. But the story goes on. You kind of have to roll with it and goes forward. And then like Shinji's trying to get back into piloting, and they have the scene where they like the two of the characters holding guns up against him. One of them doesn't trust him, and one of them is Kaji's sister, I think, not
Yeah,
Kaji's
that's like
sister, Toji's
yeah, Tojo.
sister.
That's like way later, right? Because he wakes up.
What am I missing
Well,
between
he wakes
that
up in the
and?
Wonder. He wakes up in the Wonder, and they take him to a. They talk. They talk. God,
I will say
one.
this movie is like two and a
Yeah,
half hours, and
it's really long.
there's some stuff that I don't remember, and there's like the good stuff I do remember. I
Yeah.
will say.
Well, it's they do the thing where they wake up Shinji, and he is like brought to a isolated cell, and they talk about how this cell is like incredibly isolated, how they're not gonna be able to get Shinji out of the Wonder this time, and it's basically like Loki's cell from the first Avengers movie, right? Uh,
Yeah, or that like the Hulk
yeah, that
cell.
Hulk cell, and it's they spend so long talking about it, and the thing that you realize, once Asuka leaves Shinji alone, is she lives in another one of those. Like she and Mary live in a identical cell that is just rigged with
Yeah,
C4. So it's where they keep the Ava pilots. Because like again, like the thing that the third movie and this movie, fourth movie pushes that Masato basically became Gendo in the wake of near third impact. Like she is just now like the Gendo of Will, and is like an incredibly like just a complete like character turn, has basically become Gendo in the way that she's not even interacting with her son. Like her son doesn't know that she is his mother, and she's completely dedicated herself to the cause of stopping Nerve, and also using Wonder to preserve specimens, like as an ark, right? A way to preserve specimens of wildlife. So like the last thing they do is they
yeah,
shoot capsules of like biological material that contains like all of the animals that are no longer alive on Earth into the atmosphere.
and like as it turns out, like the difference between like this and the anime is that Avas are can do some really fucked up shit when they're interacting with the angels besides murdering them,
Yeah.
which gets that character turn of Masato doesn't want fourth impact to happen, where like she has like the she pulls a Gendo but has the better reason, whereas Gendo's like, I just want a humanity, be back with my wife and combine all souls.
Well, I mean,
But yeah, she's still extremely cold. Like I agree with you on
yeah.
that
Well, I
stuff.
mean,
She is like does not want to interact with any of the Ava pilots. She these people are her
yeah.
tools in a way.
Like to her, these people are like are tools and obstacles. Like even like in the third movie when Asuka goes to like Oakley comes into the interrogation with Shinji, right? She punches the glass, and she mocks Masato by saying like all that matters is the mission, right? Because Masato is not allowed herself to care about these children um, post near third impact, and it's just like, I mean, here's the thing. I don't have a problem with like Masato being like a hardened person. I just I really wish he wasn't just Gendo 2.0.
No, or at least she could have redeemed herself. I can't remember what happens to
Oh,
Masato at
what
the end. I think
happens to
she
Masato at the end of this movie sucks.
yeah, I just think she gets they have that badass scene where the Wonder is fighting the other two ships and then they win and they create the spear
Yeah,
out of the
yeah. So
ship.
they go
A lot of
into
that. The thing about the last that there's like the middle section of this movie that I'll call it
yeah
that my eyes glazed over at some point, and it was like just all this action going on,
yeah
and me being like, I'm just gonna watch this. I can't explain what the Guff Chamber of Guff is or the Nebuchadnezzar key is. I know that it opens up and they go into the world part of the world that's
yeah, where
like
they can rewrite
everything is
the world.
different,
Yeah,
like gravity's upside down and a bunch of weird shit's going
yeah.
on.
So like they expulge all the arcs from the Wonder. They go down into the South Pole to confront Gendo at the site of second impact, and it just had this extended like action sequence that is too busy to be interesting. Um, Asuka,
Like it looks like all though because there are all these small units of like robots that are attacking Asuka, and they all remind me of the swarms from the
yeah,
Matrix, like flying together and they're shooting and stabbing them and having all these like what I would call is like there are bits of like if you think about the original series, those are all fights in cities, and these are kind of the first things where you have them acting more like mobile suits where they're kind of flying around and doing that kind of
yeah.
stuff, which It's CG and it doesn't look as good as the hand drawn stuff, but it's probably easier to make. But it was disorienting for me.
Yeah, it's just it's I mean it's a real nothing of a sequence, right? Because the sort of the end the thing that they're trying to do is to destroy the defenseless Unit 13 before it can open the Chamber of Guff or whatever. And in order to get through, it's like when Asuka lands in front of it, because like Asuka and Mary are fighting all these angels or like these Ava units, these mini Ava units. She lands in front of Unit 13 and is trying to get like to kill it basically, and her Ava's AT field is blocking it because her Ava is afraid of Unit 13. So we get the reveal of what is behind the eye patch, and that is like a mini one of those like black pillars is in Asuka's eye, and that's
Yeah.
keeping her from going full angel. So she activates that, rips it out, and
And then the ninth angel is
yeah,
contained within, and it converts Unit 2 into an angel. And
yeah.
I was like, that shit looked fucking
And
wild.
then Gendo harnesses it because that was his plan. Because Gendo is like the sort of like after I guess using the key of Nebuchadnezzar or whatever, because it's just the proper nouns Anno loves to throw around in this show. Um, has like is playing fourth dimensional chess, so he gets to like Unit 13 absorbs Asuka essentially, and then he can do what he wants to do. And like the wonder crashes after the fight. Gendo's standing on like the air quote ice, right? But it's all in like a hexagon pattern, which is a bit weird. And he confronts Masato and Ritsuko just shoots him in the face. And that's when we see that behind his new future visor is nothing. It's just like in
Yeah, it was like the place of the visor. He takes it off, and you can see where the visor would sit
yeah,
at. I have to check something really bad if you want to keep explaining. I'll just be gone for like 30 seconds. One sec.
yeah. So they have the whole sort of sequence, and I believe that scene is the explanation that Gendo has completely and utterly abandoned his humanity in order to ensure fourth impact and human instrumentality. Um, there's later through that section, his second hand, who's manning like three different airships, or like controlling three different ships that are stronger than the Wonder, is confronted by Mary, and Mary is sort of confirms that Mary is, if not one of his old students with Shinji's mother, a clone of one of his old students. He gives her like last name, which is like Mary. I forget the actual wording of it, but it is
Hello.
a translation of like Mother of God, right? Is what Mary's last name is.
Don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like that's what it's going for. It's another biblical reference, and then she
Gotcha.
leaves, and then we get to sort of the encounter on the ice with Shinji and Masato as Shinji asks to pilot Unit 1, and then we get the confrontation with the bridge crew who are saying like, no, you can't just, you told us to shoot him if he went near an Eva, and she's saying no, let him go in the robot, and Masato gets shot by Toji's sister, and then like they break down because they just shot Masato and they just don't know what to do, and the only thing they can do is entrust Shinji. So um, Masato gets patched up, Shinji gets in the Eva, and he descends to go confront his father.
Yeah, which they're like going in. Were they in the gate already, or are they going towards it? Because there's like those scenes where
They have to
like
go in.
the ship is flying around and the background is not Antarctica. It's like this, or South Pole. It's like this weird looking fucking space that
Yeah,
like Gendo is
yeah.
at
Well,
now. And
Shinji and Gendo go in there, and that's when like that space kind of becomes a like 3D photorealistic
oh yeah,
ray.
so before that, I meant before that because they have like their fight.
That's when that's
Um,
happening.
yeah. Does when does the Mary unit merge happen? Because they merge like 8 with like Unit 9A through 12, and I was like,
That's yeah,
what the fuck
yeah,
is going on with this
yeah. Because
shit?
Mary has like since too. Mary's procured her own Evangelion, which we never see. Like we never see that happen, and it's just like a Unit 8, and its whole thing is like it can absorb other Evas. So like that happens as like during that fight scene. I think like late into that fight scene, once Asuka gets taken over, she begins eating like other Evas, and she's absorbing like their parts and repairing herself, and she then destroys like those three other ships that Gendo Second
That's
is
right.
commanding. Because she gets like weird superpowers, and she stays with the Wonder to help them perform their end goal once they realize what they can do to help Shinji.
Yeah, and then this is the part of the movie that got me back was that happens, and then they have these fights where Gendo is in 13, which is like almost like a unit of like despair, and you have Unit 1, which is more hope and
Yeah, it's
stuff,
supposed to.
and they're
Yeah,
fighting in all these scenes that are like from the original show in like Rebuild 1, which
yeah,
is like Misato's apartment and the classroom and the streets, and I'm like, these are fucking great, I love it.
yeah,
Back in weird cool shit, almost like end of like Avengers Endgame referential kind of stuff where you're going back and like almost like nostalgic, but also like these are Shinji's like core like memories of his life in like
well,
Tokyo
it
3.
changes though, right? Like it starts out as these scenes from early in the series and these movies, and then there comes a point where Gendo like kicks Shinji through into a wall, and the thing is it becomes a soundstage, and it becomes a recreation of the studio that they used to capture they used to do motion capture.
Yeah, which is like, to pause for a second, like this is the first movie that they were doing like the animated characters of like scenes with like where there's people like Toji or Ray interacting with each other. Those were mocapped instead of hand animated and like storyboarded, which caused like a lot of the process to be a lot harder. And
Yeah,
I thought that was like,
yeah.
whoa, literally breaking the
Well, I
fourth
mean, it's like
wall
Anno
there.
doesn't even like the thing that like about that documentary is like Anno did not storyboard this movie, and that made production on this movie for a lot of this stuff like really hard.
Yeah, which I will say, like if you look at like I think of like big. I was watching the documentary and I was thinking of like the Mad Max Fury Road storyboards and how that was completely storyboarded before they did anything in the movie. But I guess in a way that's like Ono using the feelings of making the movie to make the ending of the movie as well. Because this movie has like the distinct two parts where it's like, or three parts where you have the beginning section about family and all that, then the action stuff, and then this ending. And I guess Ano didn't know what the ending was to be
No,
until,
until pretty late. Like they
yeah,
didn't know like what it was going to be until it
it
became
works
this
out though. I
very
think it works
eh.
out.
Depends. So like once you like you when we go through this whole sequence where they have this really kind of dull fight between these two identical Evangelions, and they're both using these spears. And then you get to the point where Gendo's saying, like, we're not going to decide this by might. And then it transitions to Gendo and Shinji talking in the subway car that has popped up as sort of like where Shinji talks to himself, right?
Yeah, like this, like it pops up in
Yeah,
Rebuild 1 and 2, and it's very similar to like I will say like the stuff from like episode 25 and
yeah,
26. It's not as similar. It's not him on the stage with the lights over him where he's breaking down what his choice is going to be if he wants to come back from instrumentality, but it's so similar that I'm like, yes, this is a little bit of, if there's some end of Ava happening at the end of this movie, which is like this movie doing a couple different things.
yeah. It's like once they sit down and they talk to each other, pretty much for like one of the first time, like not the first time, but like this is the most time they've ever spent talking to each other since like the death of Shinji's mother. Um, and it just gets in this really long conversation about like how Gendo is a really weak-willed person who never liked being around people. Like he's very socially anxious, and it does kind of reframe Gendo as all but a stand-in for Hideki Anno, and
Yeah. And what Hidekiano
yeah,
could have become. And then it talks about like the headphones, how he would always
yeah,
listen to them instead of
like
talking
yeah,
to
like why he
people,
gave Shinji
which I thought was
his
important.
Walkman, which is weird. Like they do like a weird thing with technology here because Gendo's holding an iPhone, but like he's giving Shinji a Walkman. It's a bit strange, but it's not that big a deal. And they just have this conversation, and like Shinji begins telling him, basically everything he learned at the village is that like life is this kind of like there are going to be disasters in life, but we need to keep moving forward. And that's when we get the crew of the Wonder making this final spear. Because if you have a spear, one of these like special spears, like these cosmic spears, you can reshape reality. So what they do to help Shinji is they use like the core of the Wonder to craft a spear out of the will of humanity, basically. And they evacuate everyone from the Wonder except for Masato, who like blasts forward into the eye of the sort of the like the sort of the body that this is all happening in, which is just again a photorealistic interpretation of Rei, and like
Which is
Mary,
very weird,
yeah,
I will say.
Mary and the spear launch forward into Rei's eye, and the Wonder blows up with Masato. In
Which is like the captain of the
Yeah,
ship going down with the
yeah,
ship. Got that
she
trope. Check it
Well,
off.
I mean, it's worse because it's like this first movie identifies like Kaji died, stopping Third Impact, right? And you just have Masato like repeat that instead of like I don't like someone saying like and this juxtaposed with like Gendo saying like he should have like this realization that like the only way Gendo is going to become like any kind of strong like a strong-willed person or like any kind of actual person would have been for him to spend time with his son. Like just juxtaposing that speech with Misato's just repeating Kaji's sacrifice, so she never has to sort of and like saying like her last words being like the last thing I could do for my son was to sacrifice myself instead of spending time with him is a bit much. I don't think it's very good. I don't like I really don't like how this movie does Misato.
Yeah, they did Masato dirty. I'll say that at least.
Yeah, and that's how like Shinji gets this like final spear and how Gendo's plan is kind of unfurled around him. And then we get this like final like extended 30-minute sequence, right, where Gendo leaves the train and then Shinji begins having like a heart to heart with all of his friends. So it opens like it starts with Shinji talking with Asuka, who like does not have an injured eye anymore and has grown like Asuka as an adult. Because like her plug suit is ripped open in like a lot of places around like her legs and like specifically in a lot of areas around her chest. It's like again, it's just this movie's eternally horny.
Yeah, not great.
Um,
Not great.
and and sort of Shinji talks to Asuka and mimics what she said before going off on this mission to him, which is like she finally admitted her crush on Shinji that she had during their their days with Nerve and how she grew up while Shinji didn't, and so that's that's how that fell apart. And then Shinji sort of says like, well, yeah, I had a crush on you too, and then sort of Asuka like looks away from Shinji and he like launches her pod out into the village where it lands next to Kinsuke's house because this movie has kind of set up that like Kinsuke and Asuka might like are like romantically compatible in some way. Um,
Yeah, which they like come back to at
Yeah,
the
and
end.
then Kaoru like and Shinji talk about this sort of the cycle of Evangelion and what they're here for. And Shinji's like, well, what if we just broke that cycle? Like, what if you were just a person? And Kaoru's like, yeah, I think I'd like that actually. Um,
Yeah.
and
Which like this ending is so parallel to like 25 and
oh yeah,
26, which is so great. I like that's my favorite. That is my favorite ending up until this point, and that is like this is like those endings make that
sure.
show. Like originally, like yeah, they were weird, and the fans hated it, but coming back to it, like I watched them after, and I was like, fuck, these are really good
Yeah, like
episodes.
it's always been like the strongest point of Evangelion were those final two episodes of Neon Genesis. And so and the whole thing is like when he's talking to Kaoru, he's still in that sound stage, right? That recreation of the motion capture stage. Um, and then Kaoru leaves the stage, and then he talks with Rei, like the Rei of Unit One, who like her hair's grown really long, and they have this conversation. And Rei's like, well, I don't know who I'd be, and she's like, well, the other Rei, the Rei that he spent time with in the village, like learned to live there, and he thinks that she could too. And then they have this conversation where like where Shinji basically declares that he's going to rewrite the world to get rid of Evangelions. And like when we get to this point, you really just prove Gendo right, honestly. Like so much of this movie is building up to like is Shinji like learning that like you just need to keep moving forward and that you can make a better world like eventually like through a lot of hard work. But then you just give him the tools to rewrite the world as we know it, and he's just gonna do that and just do all but what Gendo wanted to do, which is annoying.
Yeah. And I think at that point, like that ending of this movie is them showing up at a train
Yeah.
station and Shinji being older,
Oh yeah, they're both older.
and Mari shows up and hugs him and makes a joke about her breasts. So it's like, all right, again with that, stop
Yeah.
it. And then you see like Kaoru and Rei together, and you see Kensuke and Asuka together. And I can't remember if you see Toji and Class Rep together, which I don't remember her name
No.
either. It's unfortunate they don't say it enough.
No, it only really focuses on Kaoru. It doesn't even actually focus on Asuka. Like it's just like you have to pause that frame and you see Asuka sitting on a bench at that train station.
It's Hikari. I know Hikari because they say Hikari a lot more in the manga,
Yeah.
which is like Anno didn't do the manga, it was someone else. But anyway, yeah, I remember seeing Asuka and Kensuke together as
Yeah.
well.
And so like so it becomes a thing where like Kaoru and Rei are talking, or like you see them talking, and then the train comes up and Mari does like the whole like guess who it is, like puts her hand over Shinji. And it's I don't know, like the ending of that is basically this insinuation that like Shinji rewrote, or just like Shinji rewrote reality to get rid of Evangelion. So now he's just like an office worker or something, and like him and Mary are in a kind of relationship. Because like they are the only two people who know,
Yeah.
I guess, who will have a memory of like these movies happening. Like she takes off the collar that he's wearing because like they put another one of those explosive collars on Shinji. She takes it off and it disappears, and then Shinji takes her hand and they run out of the subway, like up the stairs of the subway and into what is basically just drone footage of Anno's hometown.
Yeah, there's the one imagery I forgot to say is I love the shot of it's Unit 13 and then Unit 1 above it, and Yui like they both like sacrifice themselves to spare
Yeah,
Shinji
again, it's
from some stuff, and it's you get Gendo and Yui having their almost happy ending, which is like cool.
well, no, it's like
They're tying up a bunch of loose
yeah,
ends, except for
it's
Misato. She just
I mean, it's the ending that Gendo wanted, right? Like this movie is so kind to Gendo, in a way that's really frustrating, especially as it like is how it treats Misato, how like Ritsuko gets like sort of tossed to the side after the second movie. But like yeah, so in order to actually rewrite the world, Shinji has to like pierce his soul with a spear. And Unit One, because there's a soul in Unit One, and it's Yui, it's his mother. Um, and he's ejected from Unit One as Unit One like takes the spear, and Unit 13 comes up behind it, and it's it's this last image of Yui and Gendo as they plunge the spear into like both Evas. And again, like this movie does not ask like Shinji to pay a price to do this, which is just is boggling. Um, and yeah,
yeah. I'm so glad they gave Shinji a
I mean, that's the
happy
thing, right?
ending. I
Like
was like,
it's
God, just fucking this character has gone through so much shit. I'm so glad. I was really happy. I like I like happy endings like this. I'm cool with it. I'm like, cool. They closed the book.
yeah.
Maybe there'll be more Ava later. Who knows? But
Oh, I
for now,
hope
it's like
not.
I'm into it. I'm hoping we just get a
They
comedy
can't.
series
We
that's
can't
like
get more of this.
that kind of
Uh,
stuff, like the Angelic Days and
yeah,
the Chibi one, or like the part from episode 26 where they're showing what a world would
yeah,
be without Avas, which is like picked up on in the show as
yeah,
well. I initially had my head turned at the Mari thing, and I guess I looked around a little bit. And Mari is almost like Mari started out as Anno wanting a new character because he's like, oh, if it's just the original characters, everyone's be like, oh, it's just the same series. So he wanted to bring her into it
yeah.
more.
They,
And then she kind of, I guess, turned into like a character similar to, I wouldn't say exactly, or like, I don't know anything about the author, but his wife, is that there's
yeah,
similarities between Mari and
it's
his wife, and it's Shinji and being Anno and Mari and his wife,
yeah,
and it's like they both have the glasses, and she's like an anime manga author who has some similarities. Like, okay, cool, you got the happy ending with
Yeah, I
Roy.
mean that's the thing is
Gotcha.
like Ano like is the biggest wife guy. Like the whole like thing of this ending is that both Gendo and Shinji get to like have a significant other who will help like are that they can be in love with. It's a little frustrating. Like the happiness of the ending is fine. Like it's like looking at it at face value, I'm good with it because it's just like yes, please just be okay with giving them a happy ending, my guy. But like at the point where you talk about how like you spend the first part of this movie talking about how the only way to make a better world is to put your back into it and like really work with what you have. And then you decide to have that character just rewrite the world on a whim. And then you don't even have that
Yeah.
character sort of like because they're talking about that. It's like the price of rewriting the world is a huge one, but he doesn't have to pay that price. So like there is like this compromise to the movie's like themes that I'm not particularly down with in this ending. But I mean, it's
Yeah.
fine.
I I guess me personally, I think Shinji has. It's either the character of Shinji throughout Rebuild or him in End of Eva and the first one. He's put in a lot of work. Those Ano and the character has put in a lot. So I think I'll agree with you. He did and he didn't earn it. It's one of those things where it depends on what context I'm looking at it from, and that there's also like we talked about the cycles with Kaoru. Sorry, I burped.
It's fine.
With Kaoru earlier, where he's like, this may or may not be the same Kaoru that died at the end of the anime and came back, and there's like the blood stain on the
Yeah, it's like the
moon, and that the
cursal
blood,
of coffins on the moon.
and that like, well, there's also like a cross blood stain on the moon as
Yeah,
well. You kind of see, and then like the seas being red, like the end of Ava, but that ends up being because of second impact, is that the seas turn red, which they talk about in Rebuild 2.
yeah,
And then it's like to come back from it in a meta way, it's like, yes, this broke the cycle because there's like the two endings I've kind of thought about and looked at into some stuff where it's like it's either continuing in the world of the anime without Ava's, or it took all the children and put them into the real world because of the drone shot in that. But that can also be seen as like a lot of inspiration for Ava is seen from like his hometown and different like places in his life he's been, which is like the telephone lines which come up in the documentary,
yeah,
and then like the way he wants to set up the
yeah. And the way
city
that
and all
like
that.
like going in back in a documentary, like I think the piece of footage that is shown the most often is the part where Ano is taking his iPhone, is holding it in front of him, and is running up the steps of that exact same sort of like tram station, and is running up the steps to capture what that looks like. Um, it's just I don't know. I think you'd have a much stronger ending to this show if they're fundamentally just not going to rewrite it. Like if Mary goes in to get Shinji out of like this like sort of reality space, brings him back, and then they start like building the world again. I don't think it necessarily works as well if you just turn it into modern day Japan.
Yeah, don't know. It's a little ambiguous. It might just be fan speculation. But I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea
Yeah.
as well. I was like, oh, it's pretty
I
fun.
mean, yeah.
But yeah, I like the happy
And you
ending.
know who doesn't show up in this ending? You know who we don't know anything about the ending?
Masato?
Masato. She's
Masato, yeah.
probably
It's
just
only
dead.
the children
Yeah,
that show up at the
it's just
end.
the
Like,
kids.
I mean, Gendo and Yui are separate from like the New World stuff, and it's only the kids. I thought it was a good idea to have Kaoru and Rei, because you can't have Shinji and Rei, because that's like, oh, that's his mom. Don't do that. Get away
Well,
from
it's not
that.
even.
Kaoru's the closest one to
I mean,
Rei,
it's like
kind of.
ambiguous. Like
And
it's
like,
pretty ambiguous as to
yeah,
like what their relationship is. Like they're just talking to each other. There's no like explicit romantic thing happening. They're just like looking at each other and they're talking. So it's just like have these two characters
yeah,
directly. They're basically like all but like like they were built to serve the same purpose. Like there is a lot of similarities in those
yeah.
characters.
There is like them of the Adam and Eve, and then you see like Shinji and Asuka are like the depressing Adam and Eve, the shitty Adam and Eve at the end of
Yeah,
Ava, and then like I was like, oh yeah, Kensuke and Asuka, sure, I'm in it. I think the manga went with Rei, End of Ava went with Asuka, and this one goes with Mario. I was like, all right, that's a dumb fact someone saw. I was like, okay, another one. That's another one for the list. But I thought it was cool that like the whole movie has so much fun drawing from the inspiration of the other media of this, and like doing instrumentality again, some End of Ava stuff, and then like doing something like completely new in that first arc of this, which is that town scene, which is still like the best part of this movie, I'll
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, I think like I mean I'm not super into like its meta narrative is fine, right? Like the strict like having a meta narrative is more or less fine. I'm not super into those. I think the thing is like when it mostly becomes like them interacting or like talking to each other, Shinji and Rei in that sort of motion capture studio, and they begin asking like the narrative is now asking the question of was Evangelion worth it? And I don't know if like Hideki Anno gets to ask that question considering the amount of money like as a property Evangelion has made. Like Hideki Anno could just never work again. So I don't know if I'm necessarily interested in hearing him ask that question within an Evangelion movie.
Yeah, and I like the meta narrative stuff. Like it's weird because it's shown up in other places too. Like I was looking up. I forgot a lot about what happened in End of Ava, and I was looking it up, and I watched a little bit of it, and I was like, oh yeah, End of Ava was like, yeah, people hated 25 and
Yeah.
26, and they made it to like, he made that ending. It's like the monk. It's like a monkey's
Yeah,
claw,
yeah, the monkey's paw, yeah, the monkey's paw is
like
curled,
tale of like,
or the rabbit's
oh
foot.
yeah, you're gonna get the ending, but it's gonna be fucked up, and I'm gonna like
Razz you.
show you I fucking hate you people for sending me death threats. And then there's like the movie theater stuff that is in the movie where you see a movie theater and it
Yeah.
flips and it shows all the death threats being shown, and it's like in live action. I was like, oh yeah, fuck the fans who were talking about that on messenger boards. But that's the
Yeah,
internet
all
in
end of
general.
like End of
That's
Ava
like,
is
yeah.
just Hideki Anno expressing just extreme anger and like trying to vent. He's like, in like an interview about End of Ava at that on that documentary that's came out with this movie was like he seriously sort of went through a period where he had a lot of like suicidal ideation, and the only reason he didn't take his own life was because he thought it'd be quite painful. Uh, it
Yeah, and I think that is comes off at certain points as well with like some characters, I think. Anyway, yeah, the documentary is really good. I'll suggest it to anyone. They filmed it. It's 2 parts, and it is during like at a point in production of Rebuild
yeah,
4,
well,
and then some stuff
it's like early
after.
production of like the first 40 minutes of it because they go back like Anno went back and redid that a couple of times. Like even within that documentary, he's like, I'm just gonna have to start this over from scratch because he didn't convey what he
Yeah,
wanted with that first part. Um,
and they have like that. They build like a set
of the
of
village,
the
yeah,
town that they're in, and he's just trying to get it so
yeah, he's just
right of what he thinks he wants it to be so lived in. And I got a feeling while watching it, it's like, yeah, I believe this place. Like you don't notice it, but it's
yeah,
believable.
like yeah, something that he says when he's at the studio is like he can only imagine so much. He just wants to be able to see it so that way he can like really get a hand on it. And he starts, he gets on that stage, he gets on that sort of that diorama, and he starts moving everything around. There comes that point when he's doing that where, like, he says, "Okay, I'm leaving." He does that 5 times. He says, "I'm leaving, thank you." And he does it 5 times before just jumping back on the stage and moving stuff around, and just saying, like, "Okay, this is it. I have to leave now."
And I love there's points when he's talking to the camera. He's like, "Don't look at me. The interesting stuff is everyone else and all that." And
Yeah,
it's like, it's kind of you too, but he's very like he doesn't want to be
yeah.
filmed or some other
Anno,
stuff. I think that documentary does a good job of like showing some of
it captures
Anno.
that Anno is just like a really frustrating person. Like, if I was the documentarian, um, I would be like, I'm gonna film, sir. Like, there's a point where he brings in the executive producer of that documentary. Like, he sits down with the production team of that documentary, and he tells them like, no, this is what I want y'all to be doing when you like do this documentary. I don't want y'all to be filming me as much. And that's why like the second half of that documentary is a lot of staff shots and environment shots. Because like Ano doesn't want to be
Yeah.
filmed in that way.
There's a weird thing that I realized while watching it. There's almost like a George Lucas quality to Ano, but you know George Lucas is like the much more American version of that, where they are both very famed people in their space who made these really interesting things, who are like pretty big nerds and are pretty like, they have definitely made some money off of their properties and have like can be like, you know, there are similar shots where like the editor is working on these and he's talking about what he wants from it, and he's sitting there eating like bags of chips. This is Ano, and I remember there's like a documentary showing them editing Revenge of the Sith, where he's talking to the editor about what he wants and stuff. And yeah, they're both very interesting characters in different ways. I think, you know, like Ano got his happy ending. I don't think. I mean, maybe
Lucas,
you know, George Lucas got paid
Lucas
a bunch.
is fine. Like
so
Lucas,
he has a studio.
George Lucas does not.
He's fine.
Like again, like the thing is with George Lucas, he's not nearly as attached to Star Wars as people think he is.
He got 6 movies. He got 6 movies.
Like he's again, George Lucas is the guy who calls lightsabers laser swords. Like he doesn't care about Star Wars nearly as much as like Ano seems to like care about just being okay with letting a happy ending in Evangelion happen.
Yeah, which I was like, good. That I like that. I really like the last 45 minutes of Rebuild 4 as well. I was just into it. I'm also like to say I'm also the guy who's just like, Rise of Skywalker, cool, fine. It wrapped everything up, fine. I'm cool with it. Close the book, move on to something else.
I mean, it's not nearly as bad.
Didn't want to think about it too much. I like the happy ending. It's cool. I like the dumb shit in Rise of Skywalker where all the Jedi show up to help her and another
we don't need to litigate Star Wars.
No, we don't. What else do I got on this list? Not too much. I went back and watched Death and Rebuild, which was the
clip
after
show.
The series ended.
Like the clip show movie.
It was like a year and a half before the final like end of Evangelion movie came out. So they did a compilation movie, and then they did a compilation movie that also had the first 20 minutes of End of Eva on it. So I watched the one that was just the summary of the show, and it had recontextualization throughout that, like with some narrating. And so I got into that and then watched 25 and 26. So that was like a good 90 minutes. I was like, oh, I could go through the whole show and get the gist of it and get to 25 and 26 and have a really good time with that. And then I got back to Rebuild 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah. I don't know. I think like I think I'm fine never touching this property again, probably. Like there are times I think about like maybe looking at like Neon Genesis again. But like then I think about like, you know, how in the later episodes you get a significant amount of time about like the narrative around certain characters, the characters who we talked about who had like on tossed to the side, like Ritsuko, you know, has her whole arc is that she's a scorned lover of Gendo's, you know, and how like she has issues with her mother, and her mother being the AI that controls Nerve, and then later episodes where the show's just like for whatever reason decides to get into like slut shaming Masato, because again it's like it's applying this like this basic like it's like if you went to high school psychology and learned a little bit about Freud, and then the show begins sort of implementing that philosophy onto its characters in ways that are just really uncomfortable and quite bad.
Yeah, there's a lot. I think that's why the Rebuild stuff.
Yeah, it's like the strongest part of the
well
Rebuild.
Because it wants to not be that last half of that, which is like at some point, you know, Ano got into a depression. Someone gave him a psychology book, and he started using that to write stuff. But it is very top level, like surface level stuff. Like there's that Ritsuko episode where they talk. I don't know if it's a little bit before that, because it's one of the earlier episodes where they talk about Ritsuko's mom and how the 3 AR cores are like the mother, the wife, and the woman, and how they each think differently. Which I'm like,
it's not great.
That's an idea. Like that's an idea.
Really not great.
It's true, I mean, it's true. People do act differently with that stuff, but it's an idea. People are much more complex with that, which you may or may not have as much time in 30 minutes to talk. Because they only talk about that for 24 minutes and they move on. They don't show Ritsuko a lot until, like, she has her confrontation with Gendo, with Rei, and then there's the stuff where she, like, Rei calls her a hag in the past. It's, like, the first Rei that is murdered, because the Rei throughout regular series is Rei 2. Yeah. And there's not a lot of great episodes in the second half. There's the action standouts where, like, Shinji becomes cocky is what I'll call that episode, where he's, like, fighting one of the Evas and then he gets fucked over in the end of it, was a good one. But most of them are pretty bad. Like, I'm glad they don't do the Kaji Asuka stuff where, like, Asuka's, like, she just really wants to be noticed by people, and she wants an older man because he's, you know, not a fucking 14-year-old guy going through puberty, because that's a thing that happens, but you don't need to do that with an adult character and a teen. You don't. They took it too far where I was not comfortable with it. Well, I mean, it's like, yeah, that shows up a lot of it taking it too far and I'm not comfortable happens in the show. And
well, I mean, it doesn't, like, the thing is, like, it doesn't really go anywhere is the thing. Like, they do it they do an amount of times. It doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't lead to anything. Kaji is not on that level. He's not, like, into that. I will say, like, in the way that they rewrite Kaji in the rebuilds, like, they still have that really weird gay panic scene between him and Shinji. That sucks. But, like, they remove a lot.
Yeah, they could have written that better.
They could have just not done it.
It could have been a little funnier. I just thought it was, like,
weird. It's not particular. They could have just not done it. And then they kind of relitigate, like, his relationship with Masato, and they don't make it as, like, predatory as it was in Neon Genesis. And that's how you get to the point where you're comfortable being like, well, they had a kid. Like, they totally hooked up. Which
tracks for their characters. I think, like, if things had gone back normal, they probably would have just gotten married. I don't know. I hope better for Misato. Misato's the homegirl in that series.
Well, she's, like, the one good person.
Yeah. And her drinking when she gets home scenes are always funny. It's her... And the fucking shit where they're like, I just want to be a dirty girl, not a daddy's boy. I'm like, don't fucking do this. This is the weirdest fucking shit. I know that's, like, a thing, but, like, make it a little more... Spend a little more time with your female characters. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of two-dimensional stuff that comes up with that, which is a lot of the faults of, like, could be the young... I mean, Anno started the stuff when he was, like, 31, which is when Neon Genesis started, but there's a lot of... I think that was the first series he fully wrote, and it's a lot of very, like, amateur writing when it comes to female characters, which happens a lot in media, you know. Not gonna, like, say it should be not seen, because it's there and it happens. But yeah, I can come back to Ava a little more, just because, like, I was a teen while reading these, and it was interesting to, like, think about that stuff, or at a point where it's like, it's almost like you're in Shinji's shoes and be like, what would I do? Like, how would my relationship with Asuka and Rei differ? And that's, like, when you're reading these kind of series, or, like, the young adult, like, drama stuff, where you're like, you look at it like that. And I don't know, it always comes back. I usually watch a couple of the first episodes, and then all the stuff with Rei, or the stuff with Asuka, like the first 5 or 6 episodes of Asuka, and then, like, I don't know. Sometimes, like, when this came out, I was like, oh yeah, I'll go watch 25 and 26, remember what that was about. And that was, like, we remembered, like, all that stuff about, like, how closed off Shinji was, and how, like, that talks about friendship, and, like, they use the AT field as, like, you being closed off from other people and all that kind of stuff.
Everyone's generating their own AT field, baby. You just gotta get through it. The hedgehog dilemma.
The hedgehog dilemma. Yes.
All right.
It's a thing. I will say, going back to 3 and not remembering a lot about it was fun, because I was like, oh yeah, that one was 90 minutes, and it just goes through it. It's just like, get you back into this world. Everything's new. There's this third impact. There's a plane. You're playing on a plane, and then Shinji is doing the duets with Kaoru, and it's like Gendo preparing him to dual pilot this Ava, and then they have that whole fight scene and then it was like the fights in that were way better than 4, to say.
Yeah, I mean they had like a understandable sense of scale in a way that like 4 did not, because 4 is just them throwing everything at the screen.
Which, I don't know, might work for some people. It's not as much for me. Maybe different reviews. I'll like look at it differently. I'll probably go back and watch all of Rebuild it together, but I'm good for a bit. I'll go watch some other stuff. I'm trying to think what the thing I was gonna watch. I might go do some like My Hero Academia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I like it. I have a fix where I need to get back to some anime. Yeah. Or I was actually like looking up because those Angelic Day and like World Without Ava spinoffs are fun in the teen romance kind of like cheesy manga kind of way. And they have the Shinji Ikari project was like 16 volumes actually. And then they have the Angelic Days, which is only like 6, and neither of them got mangas. And those are apparently pretty fun, and I think in one of them they get back into the Avas and do some stuff, but are like, more lighthearted and stuff, which is... I wouldn't know if I would want Anno to write like a relationship comedy,
No.
like slice of life,
no.
like anime, but I would love to get a slice of life anime out of Neon Genesis from someone who understood this very well and could do them like appropriately. Like there's ways where you could cut out a bunch of the shitty stuff, like the gay panic shit from like Rebuild 2, and then like the weird stuff where like you remember like Kaji and Kensuke are selling pictures of Asuka in the high school from like the locker room. It's like, you just cut that shit out. Like this, if you do it right, you can do it in a way that like, where you can think, oh yeah, these are just kind of like shitty teenagers doing stuff, but it's not creepy shitty teenagers. They're just like regular shitty teenagers.
That's very regular behavior for teenagers. Like that is something people did in the days before digital like photo sharing in the way that we have it now. Like it's not an anomaly, it's not a fixation. There's a way that you can frame that definitely puts them in the wrong and doesn't like seem like the anime itself is like interested in that or like excited about it. And I don't think Ano's the person to do it.
Yeah, I agree. No, I just think like you could take it out and you could still tell the same story, and I wouldn't have that was a weird moment. Yeah, I mean, there's a way to tell. It's like, oh, this is fucked up, and like,
for instance,
don't do it.
You
like,
don't share the pictures on
it's
screen.
Like,
you maybe like show the back of one because it'd be a Polaroid, right? So you show the back of one and you don't ever see what's actually on it, and that's like how you would end up doing that. That's like a better way of doing that, I would say.
Yeah, and there's like a couple of those in the original series, but I think towards the end of it that it like, yeah, it's like mostly like the 25-26 stuff, and then like most of End of Ava works for me. It's like that last 20 minutes. It's like Shinji choking out Asuka, and then the ending in the dream where he does it, and then the ending where he tries to and stops. And then there's some stuff between it where End of Ava is the bad ending of Ava, where Shinji decides he doesn't want to do this stuff. But yeah, it's all, it's Ava.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like End is specifically like Ano at his most nihilistic. Like it is Ano just incredibly frustrated with the property in every way he could be, including the people who like it. So it's a movie that probably didn't need to happen.
No, I think there's like the way where, yeah, you have the good ending from 25 and 26, and then you have everything leading up to it. Like the fight scenes in that movie are really good. The opening of that movie is really good. Like all the reproduction angels are fucking dope. And then you seeing instrumentality is really cool. And then it just does the thing you said where it's like the shitty nihilistic stuff. And then, but it's like, yeah, you get that. And then we end up getting Rebuild 4. So I was like, yeah, it's a weird path
Yeah.
of like
Well,
all
it's
this stuff
fundamentally
happening.
Anno like wanting to make a good ending, like a happier ending for Evangelion, like looking at this post that and just wanting to make sure that he himself is okay with with leaving this property alone. And it may or may not have done that for. I mean, it seems to have done that for a lot of people, and I guess that's the best thing we can like say about 3+1 Thrice Upon a Time.
Yeah, and at least for me, you have this story of Ava that is also how they're written and what happened with the multiple parts of this series that are happening. And then like yeah, you know, it's popular. Like fucking, this thing is so big in Japan, and that's how Ano had started his studio. From like Rebuild 1 through 4 were all made with his studios have Gynex, and then he distanced himself after their royalty stuff was messed up after 3. And so like they had a bunch of, I don't know if it was in the documentary or something else, but there's a bunch of shorts that the studio made and put out in a like an anime film festival that are really interesting and well animated and like different. Like the one thing that Ano talks about is like he wants anime to be different than it is, because it does go back to like kind of being the same, and for being a lot about like the otaku culture of people being over 25, and he wants to expand it beyond that, because that's where a lot of sales and anime come from, is that core culture, which, you know, that it's true for a lot of, you know, series and like media and stuff. Anyway, yeah, Evangelion.
Evangelion.
I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it with caveats, but
Oh,
if you're already into anime, I would say yes. If you're at the
it's
end of
like
this and after we spoiled all of this, I would
every
say
other word
yes.
is an asterisk, and there's like 18 asterisks. Like, well, I'd recommend it except for long list.
Yeah, yeah. But it's like a lot of people who are in like the anime watching already are like, yeah, there's shitty fan service in anime and it sucks, and it's sometimes there are properties that don't do it at all that are way better about it, but the ones you do, when you look past it and are able to understand like, yeah, this you can understand that this shit sucks and that you shouldn't, like, it's not a thing that should be okay. You can, there's like the other stories that are good too. It's like the negative and positives of everything. But if it gets to a certain point where it's like shitty, then I fucking shouldn't watch this anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's me rambling. Welcome to my TED Talk.
TED Talk about anime.
But TED Talk about anime. That was probably, that's someone's
Oh yeah.
probably done that joke video. But I don't know what are you gonna hop to another anime before we wrap up, because we're getting a little long? Is there another anime? Are you gonna hop to an anime that? Because you were talking about Gundam for a bit, but I don't know if there's something else that
Probably
like
not. Like
you've
I'm
been thinking
I
about.
I have a really limited amount of anime I'm willing to consume at any point. I think I'm probably gonna mess with probably actually finish Cowboy Bebop. Um, get back to Ghost in the Shell standalone complex, and maybe finally get into like Zeta Gundam, and that's about it.
Yeah, that tracks. I like that block of like the stuff that was on Adult Swim is really cool. Like Trigun is another recommend. I think I was gonna get into Helsing. I wanted to get through all of Helsing because I'd never watched or read any of that, and the author had passed away recently, and I was like, and the Dark Souls influences
Let's
are there.
Berserk.
Oh, Berserk. Oh yeah, Helsing's the vampire
Yeah,
one. Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, Berserk. I want to get into Berserk.
Berserk is again, it's again one of these things with like heavy caveats. I know there's like 3 OVA movies about the Golden Age arc that are on Netflix, I think. But that third movie is really is a lot. And
If I have time, I might do the original series and the movies, because
yeah,
I'm like
well, I mean
I like to
the
understand
original
both of them.
series does end at like the end of the Golden Age arc. So I mean, I'd say definitely probably check out the original series. Two, I think you might retread some material when you go to the OVAs, and then the Berserk like second series that was published like or released a couple years ago is post Golden Arc, but I don't think people liked it very much.
Yeah, I would say if you ever do get time, My always recommendation is Hunter x Hunter because there's not a lot of caveats in that show. It's pretty straightforward, but also has like some of the best action scenes I've ever seen. Some of the most interesting ways to play with like anime tropes and settings. And it's like the characters really like, you have like the main character is a young Goku in a fun way, but also gets more into the selfish side of what that character type can be and talks about it a little more, as well as like it's a show a lot about friendship, which can be fun too. I like that show a lot. I might rewatch that too. I think all of it's on Netflix. They put out the rest of this stuff, and that author is still writing it at this point, but they have of the anime that's been put out, it's all on there.
Okay.
It's good stuff. It's like it's like quality shonen that plays with the shonen genre a bit. All right. Thanks for joining me, Austin. We got through. We talked about all our Ava thoughts.
Yeah,
hopefully.
We used the key of Nebuchadnezzar to unlock the Chamber of Guff, and we looked inside, saw it, kind of did and now we've closed it.
Yeah, we psychology for each other, and this was all therapy, as it turns out. Rebuild of therapy of Evangelion. That's gonna be the name of this podcast. All right, I'll go ahead and end it here. Thank you, Austin.
That was a good one.
See you later, everyone.